Obviously, we let a very small win get to our head. That's not gonna happen again. After the slip up from the last episode, the hardest challenge continues today. We're going back to the commerce. I'm taking back what's mine. I'm not leaving. I'm not fucking leaving until I win.
Under the gun limps, I'm next to act with pocket threes, and I decide to isolate to 20. To be quite honest, I haven't figured out what the perfect thing to do with these kind of hands is in this stake level, but isolating, being the last aggressor, seems to make the most sense, so I go with that. The small blind then proceeds to 3-bet to $95. The one saving grace is I am in position, so what the hell, let's flick in the call. Flop comes out giving us an open-ended straight draw. Kind of disguised here as probably unlikely in a 3-bet pot to have a 3 or a 7 in my hand, but here we are. The opponent bets 100 and I decide to make the call. The turn card's a 4 pairing the board, which I obviously don't love, and when he bets 140, he's doing a really great job of probably seeing right through and figuring out what I have. I flick in the call once again because it's easier than folding, and the river card comes the 8 of diamonds. Unfortunately, I don't have a 7, and when he decides to jam for $170, I have no other option besides fold. To be quite honest, most of this session has been a massive battle mentally, as well as a battle educating myself on the game. I've taken a big break from poker, and coming back to stakes that I have almost never played for the last 5-6 years is really, really tough. People play very different than what I'm accustomed to in these larger games you see on stream. People are not afraid to go for it. Let me tell you, in these games, people don't like to fold like you see on stream, but they also don't like to bluff all that often. And I'm somebody that can be confused with a calling station. Anyways, moving along here, there's a couple limpers and I make it $30 with queen 5 of diamonds. I am in position. That's the only thing that's going for me here. I think I'm just abusing my position here and thinking that I'm significantly better than everyone when that's just obviously not the case. The flop comes out here that comes giving me a flush draw at the least. Feels like an easy spot for us to go ahead and continuation bet. The cutoff decides to make the call for that small bet, and the turn card comes the 9 of clubs. Bringing a backdoor flush draw, so there's now 2 flush draws on the board. And when he checks to me, I decide to bet once again for 75. I don't know what the goal is with my bet here. Don't get much to fold. I'm never going to get an ace to fold. So, and he calls again. To be quite honest, I'm getting very weak hand vibes. He's just a live tell box in my opinion. It's something that I'll go in deeper as the series goes along. But to keep it short, he's calling way too fast. And when the river card comes a king of clubs, he gives off a very weak tell where he looks down at his cards and then he looks down at his chips and he pretends to want to bet and he's fumbling with these chips and he obviously checks it over to me. This to me is almost always going to be a very weak and very marginal hand. Obviously a 1 or I guess technically 2 pair holding that my opponent wants to get to a cheap showdown. So when he checks it over to me with the hand like queen high, I'm just not going to be winning here all that often. I have no showdown value, so I decide to go for it. I go for a very reasonable bet here of $110. I don't think going very massive make much sense because, once again, my opponent's just not going to fold if he has an ace. All that to be said, our opponent thinks about it for a bit before deciding to make the call, and he calls with king, queen offsuit. So good hand to him, calls me down with second or third pair or whatever, and he wins it down. All right, y'all. I'm going to ask you guys to leave me a comment section down below on one of the biggest keys of advices you can give me or anyone else that's watching for anyone playing 2-3 or 5-5. I'm really interested to see what you guys say, and considering I've taken quite a long break from these stake levels, I could definitely use it because I am freaking rusty. In this following hand, there's quite a few limps once again until the isolation comes from the small blind player. I'm in the big blind with jack 9 of spades, and considering I like defending my blinds and I am in position from the last aggressor, I decide to make the call here, a little speculative for sure. 2 limpers make the call and the flop comes out 9-6-5 all diamonds. The small blind decides to check. That gives me the obvious green light to bet, although I'm a little worried about some flushes to be had. To be quite fair, my hand's just really strong, and although we are multi-way and there's a lot of limping going on here that can be a plethora of hands, I think we can comfortably bet and fold to all check raises, or raises I should say. I bet 60 looking to target weaker 9s like 9-8 or 9-10, which are all very likely, and I get both limpers to call and surprisingly the small blind folds. We're going to a turn card now that comes out the 4 of diamonds, one of the worst cards in the deck. And at this point, I'm just frustrated. Things are obviously not panning out. Even when I make a hand, it seems like somebody else makes a better one. I check it over to the first limber who bets 100, and then the second limber jams all in for 200. Obviously an easy fold. I was already mentally checked out once the turn card came the 4 of diamonds. And then the river card comes the ace of diamonds. I don't know how not one of these players didn't have the ace of diamonds before this was, set to be, but All that to be said, the woman, which was the second limper, ends up showing king 7 offsuit with the king of diamonds, and the first limper shows the king of diamonds and flashes there, the queen of diamonds, I should say. I don't know what the frick is going on, but obviously I have no idea how to play this game. I will definitely need to get better at folding, and in this next hand, under the gun raises to 20. That's kind of a big size for this OMC, gentlemen. And when I'm next to act and I finally looked at a premium, pocket Kirons, ladies and gentlemen, we have needed a premium in this freaking series. I 3-bet to 105. With the action getting back over to him, although it's a really big raise, he thinks about it for some time before he calls. The flop comes out exactly what we were expecting, ace high. This is pretty dreadful. The one saving grace is that I do have a backdoor flush draw. When he checks to me, this is an easy check back. The turn card comes out the 3 of hearts, now bringing a 4-liner. And when he bets 150, this is a clear spot, in my opinion, against this player type and against this player pool where I should just be folding. I allow my ability of not being able to make a fold to shine through. I make the call, and luckily for me, I get bailed out on the river that it comes a 5 of clubs. Doesn't give me the best hand, but I mean, at worst, it feels I'm going to be chopping. I don't know how in the world my opponent can have a 6 here when he raises so big from under the gun. So when he leads out for $150 again, I have a very easy call. I announced that we both have a straight on the board, and he flips over ace queen. So unlucky for us there that we end up getting out flopped, but luckily for us, at the end of the day, we still were able to find a chop.
Club GG. If you guys want to play the best games in the world in a safe environment online, it's Club GG. Head over to the Splash Squads. The link is at the top of the description. I'm telling you guys, it's some of the best games you'll ever see. You'll catch me there. If you think you can beat me in poker, if you think somehow you can, there's only one way to do it. It's so good I have to keep it locked up in the safe. I'll see you guys on the first one felt. Back to the episode.
This session has been pretty up and down. I had to top off a couple times for a few $100 here and there, but here we are looking to make ourselves a little bit of a comeback. And the comeback's going to be a little easier in this next hand. When we look down at pocket 5s, there's a limp ahead of me and I'm next to act. I decide to isolate once again like I did earlier with pocket 3s. I make it 20. The big blind cold calls and that limper calls as well. 3-way's off to a flop that is as good as it's ever going to get for pocket 5s. Ace 6-5 with 2 clubs. Flush draws and straight draws to be had. With the action checked over to me, we got a bet big. I bet $60. We're 4 ways here, and luckily for us, we're able to get a couple of people out of here, and only the big blind calls, and we're going heads up to a turn card that comes out the 4 of spades. I don't love it, but to be quite fair, the big blind has been a fairly snug player, so I don't anticipate him having a hand like 7-8. Just doesn't really make much sense for him, honestly. When he checks over to me, I want to continue betting fairly large here. What he can have is definitely the nut flush draw as well as some pretty reasonable aces. So I make it 105. He calls pretty quickly and the river card comes out these 7 of spades. Brings a 4-liner out there and oddly enough, somehow my opponent has an idea to lead out for $80. I don't love it, but my hand's obviously too good to do anything besides I think call here. I just almost call feeling like I'm going to see an 8 somehow, but luckily for us, we call and our opponent shows ace king. To be quite fair, on any other run out, we got all the money in the middle and we win it all. But on this one, we pretty much won the minimum, but happy to win it nonetheless. You can't complain about that. Early position makes it $15 to go. It's the opponent from the last hand, and I decide to 3-bet him to $45 after I look down at a beautiful king queen of clubs. He makes a call here and the flop comes out, giving me top pair, although there is a diamond flush draw. This is a really, really great board for us to do the exact same thing we did in the last hand. I bet fairly big for $60, and my opponent decides to make the call. The turn card comes out, giving us not much else to worry about as it comes to 3 of hearts. Once again, my opponent checks, and once again, I decide to bet fairly big, but even bigger than the last time around. Once again, we are looking to target all those random straight draws and flush draws that I think my opponent can have, as well as the mediocre kings that are obviously worse kickers. He does make the call for 130, and the river card is a pretty interesting one. It comes out the king of diamonds. We have top 2 pair, but unfortunately my opponent does exactly what I didn't want to see. He jams for $135. I'm obviously not good enough to fold, but I just have a bad feeling. I just don't think he's ever bluffing here. I have top 2 pair though, king and queen. I mean, whatever, I call. Obviously, we were never good. Our opponent shows ace 5 of diamonds. A good hand, to be fair. It seems like it was fairly flat. He turns a really big draw there where he has an open ender as well as a nut flush draw. Unlucky for us, every time we finally get things panning out in our favor, things just going the other way. We have now rapidly approached $1,000 into this game, which is not great. On the very next hand, to be quite fair, I'm pretty much steaming. I'm allowing my emotions to get the best of me, and I think that's the worst part of my game. One of the problems I find myself catching is the inability to just walk away from the table. It's something that I've worked on more recent sessions, but in this one, I'm going to be totally honest. Yeah, I wasn't having it. I was pretty frustrated. The momentum has not been on my favor for any point of this damn series, and when my opponent raises to 15 once again, I once again 3-bet him, and this time I have a7 offsuit. Unfortunately, I cut the video short from the last hand, so you won't be able to see what happens live, but I do have a little bit of video after the fact that catches up to it. But anyways, he makes a call here. We have an awful hand, but we are in position, and we flop ourselves a nothing burger. 10-6-5. Not a whole lot to work with here. And when my opponent checks it over to me, I throw a small c-bet of $35. I don't even have the ace of spades, if I'm being honest. I only have the 7 of spades, but here we are, blasting off with whatever. The turn card comes the 9 of clubs, bringing it back to a flush draw and now giving me a gutter ball, so at least I have something, some semblance of equity. At this point, my opponent for some reason leads out for 35. A little tricky, I might add, as my opponent has not played any hand exactly the same, so don't really know what to make of this, but in real time, I feel like it's kind of weak. To match my bet from the flop just is exuding weakness, to be quite fair, so I raise to 135. I can have the 7-8 suited of the world, and he's a little less likely because it just doesn't match his player type, but he eventually does call my raise. Praying for something to pan out, and we get something, just not how we were expecting it. It's the 7 of clubs. We now improve to third pair, which is probably never good, and the backdoor flush draw comes in. And when my opponent checks it over to me, I'm kind of just in between a rock and a hard place. Like, what do I even do? Like, if I check, I know I'm going to lose, and if I bet, I'm probably going to get snap called by some random 8. But then I just asked myself, like, we played this hand as ridiculous as we possibly could have to this point. Like, might as well put the cherry on top. I go all in for $315. My opponent thinks about it for a moment before folding. Whew, we needed that one badly. We are now super close to back to even after an absolute roller coaster of a session. Let's go. It seems like the poker gods are finally answering my prayers. I look down at pocket queens. The ladies are in early position, and I raise to 15. One of the very, very call happy players to my left decides to call, and then the player to his left, who's been kind of snug, but you know, definitely in the mix, not having a great session himself, decides to 3-bet to 65. With the action back over to me and my opponent only having around $300, we are in a very, very opportune spot. If I win this all in and we somehow get it all in, I can finally book a frickin' win after a really, really rough roller coaster of a session. I am super excited. I decide to 3-bet, or 4-bet, I should say, to $310. Everything is finally going to plan. And when the action gets folded back over to him, he thinks about it for a brief moment before deciding to stick the rest of his chips in, which is about $360. $50 more for me to call. Let's go. Let's run it, man. I am super, super excited. The flop gives me an over pair as it comes 9-5-4. The turn card's a little scary. It comes the ace of diamonds, but my opponent doesn't seem to like it either as he's shaking his head. The river card comes out the 5 of spades. I am actually glowing because my opponent does not seem happy whatsoever. This one's going to sting. I played for like 3 hours. I busted my ass on the second half of the session trying to get back to even, and I just couldn't find a way to do it. We were literally one flip away from having $1,300, but instead we end up down to $504. Into the game for 1,000, out for 504. We'll put the updated total to our current bankroll challenge here. Definitely disappointing, definitely a heartbreaker, but what can you do? C'est la vie. On to the next.
With my eyes closed,